Hello, welcome to the Eclectic Reader. Listen to great books and stories while you use your eyes and hands for other things. Now here's your host, Madison Mason.
Hi, it's Madison Mason. Thank you for coming back. We're in the final turn of The Gray Quarry Boys. This is Chapter 61. The Gray Quarry Boys, Chapter 61, The Final Mailbox. The phone rang around 1 in the morning. Herman was dreaming a dream he hadn't had for years. A dream of the quarries, when he was a dynamiter whose job it was to drill the granite and place the charges. There was something so pure in the way the dynamite blasted away the hardest rock, and when Herman placed the charges just right, there was a minimum of waste and a maximum of usable stone. Herman was an artist. But that was long ago when the quarries were still rich, before they played out and he turned to farming for a living. Now he couldn't remember what he had for breakfast yesterday, but he could still recall and dream of setting charges 25 years ago. And he could still hear the sounds of the warning alarms when they were ready to blow, the sirens and the bells. He came to and realized the phone was ringing, and he heard fire trucks in the distance. He lifted the receiver. Marv Kyle was calling from over the hill. Something about a fire near him. They were calling out the volunteers. He should be alerted. Herman thanked him and hung up. Just before he called his neighbors, he noticed the orange glow through his bedroom curtains. Looking out the window, he was shaken to see the hills up by the highway in flames, and the fire trucks arriving. He pulled on his overalls and hurried downstairs to help. When he drove up to the highway, 3 pumpers were already there and had the fire under control. Fortunately, there was no wind that night, and the flames hadn't jumped the road into the forest. That would have been a disaster. As it was, the fields along the roadside were scorched at the edges, but no major damage had been inflicted. They had caught it just in time. Half the men in the community were there in various states of dress, rousted from their beds in the early hours. It was decided the fire had originated in the area of Herman's mailbox, which now stood forlorn, a bent pole with chunks of concrete exploded by the intense heat. "Who'd have done this, Herman? You got any enemies you can think of who'd do something like this?" Herman Kroll shook his head sadly, a small, confused man. "Nobody I know of. Not a soul." He ambled slowly back to his car, deep in thought, and drove away, back to his place. The next few days passed without Herman saying a single word that wasn't necessary. He was contained like a vault. He communicated with Charles as to what had to be done around the farm. He went into Gray Quarry for his meals, but by and large it was the opinion of all who knew him in the town that Herman was a changed man. And everyone had their version of what it was. Some thought he was pining away. Others said he was in shock. Most chalked it up to grief. They were all correct. What they didn't understand is that Herman was also planning the rest of his life. Herman was a man at the end of his road, and he knew it. He had no purpose anymore, no reason to go on living. It wasn't bothersome to him. He simply wanted to finish it off in the best way possible for all concerned. And he missed her terribly. He missed her from his soul out. He found himself searching for her in the house, the way an old dog will return to the master's place and pine long after the master is gone. He sought her in everything, and spent hours at the cemetery every Sunday talking to her gravestone. Then one day, he just up and sold the farm. Just like that, he drove into Jefferson City and made a deal in the bank with the real estate developers who had courted and solicited him for years. He drove a tough bargain, and he sold them the place lock, stock, and barrel, with the exception of 140 acres of choice farm and woods that he deeded over to one Charles Murphy, his loyal hand for years. He sold Charles the land for the kingly sum of $40, $1 for every year they had known each other. Herman Kroll had never seen Charles Murphy cry, not even when he lost his son in Korea. But Charles cried now, when Herman gave him the deed. Big silent tears slid in shiny tracks down his blue-black cheeks as he slowly read and reread the bill of sale and the deed certificate. He spoke softly, so quietly that only he and Herman heard. "This is a great day. This will be in my family forever, Herman. I'll see to it. You're a fine man and a good friend. We'll never forget this, not as long as any of us live." Then he took Herman's hand in his great paw and shook it gently, as if handling a child. Herman kept shaking his head no, like it didn't matter. They'd worked side by side in the quarries and on this farm since World War I had ended. Their conversations didn't require words. Herman called his children and told them what he had done. To say they were shocked at his sudden action would be tantamount to describing the atomic bomb as a party snapper. The family was floored. The phones didn't stop ringing in each other's homes for weeks. They attempted to divide all the furniture and belongings evenly without fighting and wound up at each other's throats. The women fought a bloody if civil battle for silver, china, and lace. They pitted husbands against each other, brothers against sisters, and women against men. Herman stayed out of it and told them all that the money from the farm was being placed in trust to his grandchildren, so they could forget trying to kill each other for that. And he let them have at each other just as they had done as children, never interfered then, and had no intention of doing it now. He had been in the minefields of Belgium. He knew danger when he saw it. Finally, the internecine dust settled, and everything was worked out to everyone's dissatisfaction. Herman then announced he was planning a vacation to Washington, D.C. He had never seen his nation's capital, and he wanted to do it before he died. After that, he planned to move to Raleigh and take a furnished room so he could be near his grandchildren. That's all. Simple plans. No, he didn't want to stay with anyone. He didn't want to be a burden. He would live his own life, and they would see each other when they could. Having baffled his entire world with his monumentally strange behavior, Herman set about one last project. He had a month before he must vacate. He watched the house slowly empty of its belongings. He personally sneaked most of the heavy equipment and tools over to Charles' place, knowing the bank would sell it all off for nothing on the dollar just to get rid of it. He sold his livestock off as per his agreement with the bank. For a whole week, Herman walked the old farm, now deserted, foot by foot, inch by inch, talking to someone not there, sometimes chuckling, often gesturing. Once Charles, on his way to town, stopped his truck and just watched Herman for near onto half an hour out in his plowed cornfield. Herman sat in the middle of the furrows, crumbling dirt clods and watching the red dust sift between his rough-knuckled fingers and fall on his overalls. The old man seemed happy enough, like a child, whistling to himself. So Charles drove on. What no one saw was Herman lying flat on his back on the front lawn of the house on the night of the full moon, staring at the sky the way they did when they were young. And even though she wasn't there, he talked to her, and she talked back. In his old heart and fading mind, she talked back and called. That's when he decided to build her the final mailbox. It would be a tribute to their years together on this land that she loved so. He spent a whole day drawing up the plans, rejected several sketches as not right, and then settled on one he knew would please her. It took him the better part of a week just to get it right. It was a barn. Not like theirs, but a big red gabled barn with turrets at each end of the lazy sloping roof, like she used to describe the German and Scandinavian barns of her beloved Minnesota farmlands. At one end he attached a painted sunrise scene, with bright morning clouds and a flock of her favorite beautiful mallards in relief against the sky. And on the other end of the roof he carved a handsome red rooster, crowing the dawn of a new day. He carefully filled the entire inside of the barn, floor to ceiling, with material he had saved for years, tucked away inside his own barn, material he had used creating his own farm. Then he painted the windows, doors, vanes, shutters, lightning rods, everything in perfect miniature detail, a glorious piece of work. Finally, it was finished. When the paint dried, he drove it very carefully up to the highway. Herman spent the morning seating the new post to which it would be attached. Once the concrete set, he carefully, ever so carefully, mounted the beautiful new mailbox on its pedestal. He suspected that whoever destroyed his other 4 mailboxes, along with the 95 of his neighbors' boxes, would most likely be back. Whoever had that much hate, that much contempt in him, whoever would destroy what people loved, could hurt his sweet Marlene, set fires in the night, whoever would do these things to innocent people and skulk away like a rat in the dark, they would be back. Whoever that was would not be able to abide anything as beautiful as this tribute to his lost love. But he didn't care. Herman didn't care anymore. That person was no longer important to Herman Kroll. He bolted the box onto the iron stand and stood back to inspect his work. The mailbox shone in the afternoon sun, radiant and proud. She would love it, he knew that for sure, and it would be something the postman would enjoy seeing each day, even though it would soon be destroyed. The developers were planning to bulldoze the farm to make way for houses. All of Herman's mail was now forwarded to his daughter's house in Raleigh anyway. No one would ever use this mailbox. It was destined to be destroyed, but Herman didn't care. He went back to the house, loaded up a suitcase, and locked the doors of the old farmhouse for the last time. All the time they had spent together, all the years they had shared, he now locked inside the old home. The key made a final click, and he stood at the door for a few moments, looking in through the glass, like a stranger coming to visit and finding nobody home. Then he shuffled to his car. The old house watched him go in sad silence. Herman drove onto the highway and paused to look at the new mailbox. Bright and cheery in its red pride, it possessed a certain warm seduction. He suspected they would be hard-pressed not to destroy it, given their record so far, but he really didn't care. He was done with all that. He drove on without looking back, headed to the first vacation he had taken in years. And after that, his road would soon be traveled to its final destination anyway. Herman Kroll was entering his new life, looking forward now. So on he drove.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of The Eclectic Reader. Please go on to the next numbered episode to continue. Also, check us out on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. If you'd like to help support the project, you can donate under Madison Mason at Patreon. And please, check out our website, kltkrdr.com, for more information.
Hi, this is Madison Mason. I want to personally thank you for listening to The Eclectic Reader and invite you to share your experience, your thoughts, and your suggestions. We have many great books lined up for the future, but if you have requests for anything that is in the public domain, please email us at kltkrdr@gmail.com.
kltkrdr@gmail.com